You're listening to the AmWritingFantasy Podcast. In today's publishing landscape, you can reach fans all over the world. Query letters are a thing of the past. You don't even need a literary agent. There is nothing standing in the way of making a living from writing. Join two best-selling authors who have self-published more than 20 books between them. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Autumn Burt and Jesper Schmidt.
Hello, I'm Jesper, and this is episode 53 of the AmWritingFantasy Podcast. And today I've got something special for you while Autumn is away, because Adam Croft has agreed to join me today to discuss read-through. And while Autumn and I have talked about the importance of writing in series before, we've never really covered read-through in more depth. So Adam and I are going to look into why it is important, how it could revolutionize your series sales, and how to calculate it. So Adam is a 7-figure author and has sold more than 2 million books. He is one of the most successful indie authors in the world, and he has been featured on BBC television and radio, together with many other media outlets. So as you can hear, we've got some real expert advice from you for this final podcast episode of 2019. So I think we're going to close out with a bang here. So welcome to the AmWritingFantasy Podcast, Adam.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so I just said, as I just said, when people hear this, we are actually at the 30th of December, but we are recording well in advance of time, and we are only in the end of November at the moment. So I don't quite feel the Christmas spirit yet, but I don't know about you, Adam.
Well, yeah, Happy New Year to everybody. I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas.
Feels fluid.
Yeah, I hope no major events happen in the next month that we're obviously not going to be able to reference.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's just here in Denmark. There's no snow yet, and it's just raining, and it's a bit like boring autumn weather, but not much of a Christmas feeling yet. But hopefully it'll come over the next coming weeks.
England is very much the same, but in terms of the Christmas feeling, we're getting there. My son will be 3 in February, so yesterday we went to visit Santa. And we came home and put some Christmas music on and things like that to try and get into the spirit. We had to do it a little bit earlier than we might otherwise, because he's only small and he enjoys getting into it. But Christmas spirit is growing here, I would say. Yeah,
they've started decorating some of the shops here, but I've not seen any Santas around yet, though.
Well, they've all been over here, that's why.
Yeah, he's not made his way past Denmark yet.
Not got to Denmark yet, no.
Yeah. All right, but we're going to talk some read-through stuff here today. But I was thinking, Adam, because I also saw the book, the nonfiction book you wrote, the Indie Author Mindset. And I know that you always talk a lot about taking the long-term view on your author career rather than focusing on short-term gains. And I really like that, because that's always what I advocate as well. But I think maybe when we're talking about read-through, maybe it's relevant to just touch a bit on that, because I think it's important that we don't get too tied up in how do I earn a lot of money short-term kind of thinking, isn't it? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, read-through is, without a doubt, a long-term thing to be considering. But it is vital for a lot of reasons we will cover, and it will give you some information, some statistics, which will effectively inform your advertising and allow you to know straight away when you're looking at an ad whether it's likely to be profiting or not in the long term. It is, it's very much tied into the kind of the analytical business side of things when you're looking at the long term of publishing, and it's about calculating really whether $1 you spend today is going to make you back perhaps 5-10 times that over the course of months or even a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, when we're talking about read-through, it's also about for people to go from reading your book 1 and on to reading the rest of the series, you need to put in the professionalism and do a good job in terms of making sure that each of the book, and especially of course that book 1 is professional, so that it's professionally edited. It has been through all the editing stages in terms of making sure that the plot is there and that there's a good story, there's good character arcs and all that good stuff. But because without all of that, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if people go into all the marketing, advertising space here with the mindset of, let me put out some quick books in a quick series here so that I can get some read through and I can earn some money, then I think that would be shooting yourself in the foot.
It would, and I know a fair bit about that. I've been there myself. I mean, I would say to people, yes, you do really need at least probably 3 books out in a series before you're going to start doing any heavy advertising, or before you want to get anywhere near making a profit from that advertising anyway. There's nothing wrong with getting the name out there and finding those readers, but giving them something to read onto is absolutely vital. And yeah, it is the case that you want that book, obviously, as you do with all your books, to be the best they possibly can be. I fell foul of that myself. I wrote my first book in my series, my main series, finished it in 2010, and that came out the first couple of days of 2011. And I wrote the first book of my other series a few weeks later. So at that point, I didn't really know how to write. I certainly didn't know how to publish. This was in the early days of the Kindle over here. So it was very much hit and hope. The books weren't great. They're still not brilliant. I mean, I have revised them since, but I can't, what I would like to do is rewrite them all from head to toe, but that's obviously not practical for a number of reasons. So yeah, I'm battling that myself. In fact, having fairly low read through on that series because the first couple of books are just so poor.
Yeah, Autumn and I also discussed it at one point. I do not recall right now if it was on a podcast episode or if it was just in one of our personal conversations, but we did discuss at one point this dilemma of going back and rewriting a book one. And also it's like, I guess you could say it also depends on how long the series is after that, because is it really because it will take quite a lot of effort. And is that really worth it? I don't know. I guess that's...
Well, this is the thing. I mean, if you've got a long ongoing series, then I would say just carry on writing the series. The new books that you write, the more of those you have out will flood out the poor ones earlier on. I think people expect a series to get better as it goes on and a writer's career to get better as it goes on. And as you say, the amount of time it takes and the benefit that you might get from that, I think it's probably the case that it's not worth doing major revisions. I mean, if you go back and there are loads of typos and things and stuff that just doesn't make sense and is objectively poor, then by all means make some small tweaks. But I don't think major rewrites are good unless you've got, for example, a very tight trilogy or something like that, where one really poor book is going to stand out quite clearly against the other two.
So maybe we should actually start out by defining what we mean when we say read through.
Yes, we can try. I mean, it is essentially the percentage of readers which will read through your series or read through from one book to another. So, for example, if 100 people buy book 1 in my series, and in a similar period of time, 25 will buy book 2, then I can assume, and I underline and embolden that word, assume that basically a quarter of people who have read book 1, or who at least who have bought book 1 have read book 2. You're not going to get figures that high for a number of reasons, which we'll go into later, but that would give you a read-through percentage of 25%. Your read-through will likely drop the further you get through a series, mainly because more people will come in on book 1 and will not get as far as book 2, then won't get as far as book 3, and so on. But there are a lot of things that can influence read-through. It's not necessarily the case that if you've got a read-through of 2% or 5%, that doesn't mean that 95 or 98% of people didn't enjoy the book. Generally speaking, most people who buy the book won't even read it. I mean, I think we all can attest to the fact that the number of books we have on our Kindles or even on our bookcases is infinitely more than the number we've ever read. So most people who buy the book won't read it. People who do buy it, some of them won't enjoy it. Most of them probably will. And even those ones who do enjoy it won't necessarily automatically, in a kind of automaton robotic style, go and buy the second one. They might think, oh yeah, I'll get the second one at some point, and then forget about it. Or they might pop it onto their wish list and never actually buy it, or the doorbell might go while they're in the middle of doing it. So, all of these things will contribute to effectively lowering your read-through rate. And it doesn't matter so much what the read-through rate is. It's not really about influencing that number. It's more about calculating it, finding out what it is, and then utilizing that in your advertising and your marketing as a piece of information which can actually be very helpful to you.
Yeah, and I was wondering while you were talking there, do you have any guidelines or whatever we want to call it on? So if people calculate their read-through rate, and I do know we haven't really explained how to calculate it, but maybe we can come back to that in a second. But if they do calculate their read-through rate, do you have any guidance or ideas about when can they consider okay, now I have a fairly good read-through rate versus this is not good enough, for example? Or do you think it doesn't matter and you sort of benchmark against yourself almost, or what do you think?
Exactly. I think you do benchmark against yourself. I think to a large extent it is what it is. It's not massively influenceable, to be honest with you. You can't really influence the read-through rate too much other than writing a better book. And, as I said at the top of the show, we should be writing the best books we can anyway. So, it's kind of irrelevant, really, whether the read-through rate is good or bad. There isn't anything that is good or is bad. Obviously, the higher the better. But I wouldn't be alarmed if you calculate yours and find it coming out at sort of 2%, 5%. It's not the case that is a huge failure. It's going to make life more difficult for you, of course, because effectively, if you're selling a copy of book one and it's costing you more to advertise that than it is the royalty you're making on book one, that's not necessarily the end of the road, because the logic is that a percentage of those people will then go and buy book two, book three, so on. If you've got a series of 10 books and if you know that X percent of people will buy all 10 books, then you know that a sale of book one isn't just worth a sale of book one. It's worth a sale of book one plus X percent of sales of 10 books, if that makes sense. So it's about calculating the value of a reader rather than a sale, and calculating your read through is about getting that magical number of how likely that person who has bought that book is to become a reader of the series rather than just a purchaser of book one.
Yeah, and I think, at least from my perspective, I would say, and maybe that was what I was trying to get at as well, but I guess I would say that people shouldn't be scared when they calculate the number, because it's going to be much lower than you think.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like 70% of people who read my book one is going to read book two. It's probably not like that. Yeah.
I mean, 70% of people who bought it won't even read it. So never mind like it and get to the end, or their Kindle might crash, or, we've all read books by authors that we've loved and we know there's more there in the series, but we still haven't gone out and bought them for whatever reasons. We've just forgotten, or, life gets in the way. And that's generally the biggest influencer when it comes to books and buying books, is that life gets in the way. Every time I put a new book up for pre-order, for example, I put something in my readers group on Facebook. It's got a couple of thousand people in that now, I think. And I always put a quick straw poll up and say, in case you've not already bought the book, can I just ask why, out of interest? Is it priced too high? Does the blurb not sound enticing? Have you just not got round to it yet? Have you not seen any ads for it or anything like this? Is this the first you've heard of it? And overwhelmingly, 70, 80, 85% of the results are that people say they just haven't got around to it yet, despite me emailing 4 or 5 times, or putting things up on Facebook all the time. People are busy. They put it to the back of their minds. They would do it at a later date. And that's going to be the case when people have read your book, and the only nudges they get to buy the next one is a mention in the back of the book, perhaps, or your Kindle or your Kobo or whatever it is popping up and saying, actually, did you know there's more books in this series? Would you like to grab them now? If they don't do it then they haven't got any more reminders. So, that is going to lower the read-through rate anyway, quite naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as you say there, of course, it's a very good idea to put that link to the next book in the back of the first book, so that they can go on straight to buy the next one if they like what they just read. And at least it's more likely at that point in time that they will do it right away, because they're right there on the page and the link is staring at them. So so that's, of course, it's a good trick. But I would also say that it's I think I don't remember the exact number, but I read somewhere something like you had to have read, I don't know where it was, like 5, 6, 7 books, something like that, of an author before you actually start remembering the author's name.
Yeah.
So that's also what you're battling against here, is that people just don't remember.
And e-readers have made that really difficult. One e-reader has made that really difficult, and that, of course, is our beloved Kindle, which doesn't give you on the lock screen when your Kindle is locked. Most of them don't show you the book that you're reading. And then when you unlock your Kindle, it just goes straight back to the text. So you can't remember the title, you can't remember the author. Some of them, like iBooks, will show you the covers. Kobo as well, when you lock your device, the front cover is the save screen. So some of them are better in that regard, but many of the Kindles don't do that. And a lot of people, I'm forever getting emails from readers telling me that they loved my latest book X, and I think I've never heard of that book. They're talking about characters of mine that are their favourites, and I'm thinking, they're not mine. And I'll, I'll Google them or search on Amazon and find out who did write them, and I'll go, oh yeah, that was by so and so, wasn't it? Yeah, that was a great series too. And try not make them feel too daft about it, because they have taken the time to email me after all. But yeah, it is phenomenal that people don't know the books they've read. We quite often remember the stories, we remember the characters, but it can take a while to remember the name of the author, or at least the title of the book. So again, it goes back into why creating a strong brand is so important, and why when we're calculating read-through or trying to gain read-through and get readers through our series, I think there really does need to be a kind of a fresh approach that's, I'm not sure what it is yet, but it does need to take these things into account and recognize the fact that the world as it is, the ecosystem as it is, the technology as it is, kind of works against us in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe could you say maybe some words about how do people actually calculate this stuff then? Maybe that's a good thing to get into.
Well, this is a difficult thing. I probably should give a few cautionary notes beforehand when it comes to calculating read-through. There are many things that can skew it and can cause some issues, and one of those is perma-free. We mentioned how few people sometimes will read through from one book to the other, and if you've got one book which is permanently free, perhaps your first in series, that effect is going to be amplified massively, because free books on the whole just don't get read. People fill their Kindles with them. I've got hundreds of free books on my Kindle. I'm never going to get through to reading them all. It's just not going to happen. But you see one and you think, well, it's not costing me anything. I might as well grab it and then read it when I've got some time in the future. And as we all know, most of us writers and creatives are also procrastinators. We know very well that when we say we'll do something in the future, it's not going to get done. So those books largely don't get read. The ones that do get read, a huge percentage of those will be read by people who only get free books. They're on low incomes, or they don't believe you should pay for books, or whatever the reason is. They're just not going to go and buy book 2 because, for them, reading is a free thing, and that's fine, I guess. But they're not going to become long-term readers of yours anyway. So this is why I'm kind of on the fence about free. I think it can be helpful in some ways, in some big ways, and that's an episode for another time. But things like that can really skew the data.
I was sorry for interrupting you, but I was just about to inject there, because we actually did release a podcast episode, 3, 4, 5 episodes back or something like that, about permafreeze, because we also surveyed a lot of our readers, and we were asking them different kinds of questions. But what really came out as a conclusion from that is that what you just said, basically, because the book is free, people download it, it ends up on the Kindle, they never read it again. So our conclusion out of that was actually that we don't think free books are any good anymore, because it doesn't help. It's much better to get them to, because we also ask the readers questions about, so we ask them question, if you have got a book for free, do you read it right away, or at least right after the one you're currently reading, or what? And most of them said no, they'll get back to it at some point, which means, of course, in translation, they will never get back to it.
No, I mean, free does have some uses. I don't think it's a long-term viability. I think it's good for sometimes a quick burst of visibility. Free books will get downloaded more, they'll get seen more, they'll get found more, and also, I don't want to go too far off piste here, but you can, if you've got audio, for example, with WhisperSync add-on enabled, then, for example, having a book free for a short period of time to get a BookBub featured deal can actually rake you in a fair bit of cash in audio add-ons through WhisperSync, because a lot of audio listeners, when they've run out of their free books for the month, or their included books for the month in their plan, will download free or cheap Kindle books and then pay an extra couple of dollars for the audio add-on. It's a much cheaper way of them doing that. So there can be some cash to be brought in there, but I digress. We'll get back onto read.
That was me derailing you. Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's it's a vital point of this, really, a vital part of calculating read through. Accounting for all of these things, and I think in terms of being an indie publisher, nothing is a satellite thing. Everything kind of influences each other, and that does make calculating read through more difficult. But I'll try and break it down into its most basic parts. It is radically oversimplifying it, but effectively, you want to take a period of time, which ideally, and this is where it becomes difficult again, gives each book a fair crack of the whip. So, for example, if you're taking the last year, you've got a 5-book series and you're taking the last year, but book 5 has only been out for a month, then you're not going to have a full complement of data there. You might just want to include the last month in that case. So you're essentially giving each book a similar amount of time on the market, so that you've got fairly clean data. You also want to make sure that period of time is as long as it can be, to be fair, so that you've got the biggest amount of data you can, and the data therefore should be truer. So effectively what you want to do is look at the number of downloads, purchases that each book has had in that period of time, and the amount of money that book has made in each period of time. You're then calculating, for example, I did this in one of mine. I took a fairly short time period. I looked at my series, and in that period, book 1 sold 518 copies, book 2 sold 390, book 3 was 312, book 4 275, and book 5 240. So these are just kind of fairly random numbers, but you can see the numbers reduce each time, of course, as readers drop off, they forget to buy the next book, they give up on the series, whatever it is. And you're then calculating the percentage that read through from one book to the next. So book 2's download numbers are X% of book 1's, book 3's are X% of book 2's, or whatever. Then gets the end of the series, you're looking at the number who have got right through to the end, compared to the number who have started the series, and looking at what that percentage is of all readers. What percentage got as far as book 5. That's the reader you're looking for in a calculation that you're aiming for there. So, say for example, you calculate that 20% of your readers, for example, make the full way through a 5-book series. You then want to calculate the value of that series. So you've got book 1, where you might have a royalty of $1, and say books 2, 3, 4, and 5, you've got a royalty of $2 each. So somebody reading the whole way through the series would earn you $9. But 20% of people read their whole way through the series. So essentially, somebody starting book 1 has a 20% chance of reading through the series and earning you $9. And this time in the morning, I'm not going to try and work out what that is in my head. I think it's about $1.80, something like that. So, or is it? Let's work that one out. So it is $1.80. So that reader wouldn't actually be worth that $1 to you. It'd actually be worth almost twice that. So when you're selling advertising a book, and you're spending, I don't know, whatever it is on advertising that, and you're not quite making a profit. In fact, you're probably doubling your money in, just using those numbers that I've plucked completely out of nowhere. So if you know that reader would earn you that $1.80 for reading through the whole series, which is pretty low. It's just a number that I've generated through inventing random ones, let's face it. Then if you also know your conversion rate, which you can work out through some funky manipulation of the Amazon ads dashboard, for example, then you can work out what you can spend on an ad. So if you know that you make $1.80 for somebody who reads through the series, you know that 10% of people who hit your landing page will convert into a sale. Your conversion rate is 10%. Then you know that 10% of that $1.80 means that if you're spending less than 18 cents a click, you're likely to be making a profit across the series. So essentially, it gives you that final piece of data, that final piece of information that will enable you to make a calculation as to looking at an ad and knowing fairly instantly whether it's likely to be profitable, and knowing what your benchmarks are for advertising, and knowing that you've got that ceiling there, and as long as you spend under that, you'll be making a long-term profit. That's it. I was going to say in short, but that wasn't very short at all.
No, but I think the main point with this read through and why it's important to do this in calculation here is because it increases the bar, so to speak, on how much you can spend on advertising your book one. Because if you look at your book one in isolation and you try to work out, okay, how much can I spend looking at my conversion rate to make sure that I get at least let's say a 1% return on investment or something like that, then that number will be incredibly much lower on how much you can actually bid on your ads on Amazon, for example, or on Facebook or wherever you're advertising, compared to when you take into account all the revenue you're going to get from the rest of the series. Then you can increase your ad spend and your bidding, and basically making sure that you have a fair chance in your ads actually being served. Because if you only look at like a $2.99, $3.99 book one or whatever, or even let's say $4.99, when you take away the royalties from that and you take away the conversion rate, which will drop you down to, let's say, then 10%, then you're bidding so low to ensure a positive return on investment that your ads are never going to get shown on Amazon anyway.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I looked at, for example, I just found my figures there while you were talking rather than inventing one. So I thought I'd find the actual figures that I did. So, for example, book one in my series at the moment is at 99 cents. That's the price point I'm testing there. So I will earn probably about 25 cents, something like that, nearly 30 cents for a download of that book, for a sale of that book, which makes you think, well, actually, that's not even worth advertising. But that series, based on my read-through rates, I've worked out what a reader that comes across is worth over the lifetime of their readership. So, for example, I've worked it out for each different vendor, and I can see that, for example, a Kindle reader to me in that series is worth £6.51. A Kobo reader is worth £7.10. An Apple reader is worth £7.81. So they're actually, it's worth somewhere around the £7 mark, a reader. So whereas it looks as if there's a 20 or 30p royalty to be made there, that's not the case. Actually, getting somebody to read that series could be worth about £7 or £8 to me, and that's a massive difference from what you believe that reader is worth. We're not talking about being pennies out here. This is thousands of % higher, and will make a massive difference to the way that you do your marketing or advertising. Of course, you're not going to see that £7 or £8 possibly for a couple of years, but that's a huge return. And with most businesses not making a profit in the first couple of years anyway, I mean, I'd happily tuck away a pound or two if I knew that it was going to be making me back 7 or 8 a couple of years later.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I guess we can tie back to the beginning where we talked about that this is a long-term view on things, right? It's not about making a quick buck or something. And it takes, I mean, I don't know for other, I mean, I know some people can read a book really quickly, but for me, it takes months and months and months just to read one book. So if I'm your reader, it'll take forever.
Yes. And that's the thing, everybody is different, and there are so many different variables that go into this, which is why having the maximum amount of data we can is vital. I mean, for example, if you're a new author, you might not have the volume of sales and the amount of time behind you to be able to get clean data to calculate this, which is why I think calculating your read-through is something that is best done the more you go on. For example, it's something which is worth doing throughout your author career. It's worth doing, every few months and just seeing what your read-through rate is at that point in time, because it will change. The data will get cleaner, so it's well worth repeating the exercise.
Yeah, for sure. I was just wondering as well, so for those people who have their books in Kindle Unlimited, I guess that will complicate matters a bit, because you will have some people buying the book, you will have other people borrowing the book. So you need to be a bit careful with calculating there, I guess, right?
Yeah, Kindle Unlimited does complicate things as well. Your read-through rates will probably be higher, but the competition is also higher and your royalty rate will be lower. It also doesn't help that the amount you get paid for page reads changes and drops, let's face it, every month as well. So that does complicate things, and the calculations there are a bit different and are even more complicated. I mean, things like this aren't difficult to get across in the medium of audio anyway. It's easy. There is a little something I can do for your listeners to help out there, which we'll cover at the end of the show, I'm sure. And even things like box sets can complicate things, because you think, well, okay, is somebody reading, for example, if you've got a box set of books 1 to 3, is somebody reading book 4 coming from book 3, or are they coming from your box set of 1 to 3? Also, a lot of people read out of order. A very large number of people will read out of order. I'm forever getting messages on Facebook and emails saying, oh, I've read these 3 books of yours. Which one should I read next? I'm thinking, well, you've read books 2, 5, and 7 in series out of order. So, I'm glad you've enjoyed them, because that's frankly miraculous when you've read them in that order. But people do, and it doesn't matter how much you say this is the next book in the series, or you have things plastered all over your website, all over your emails, all over your Facebook with all the books in order. People are people; they will just do whatever they want, to be honest with you. So, read through is probably the line of best fit, I would say. It's the best thing we have at the moment, but when we're dealing with that amount of unpredictability and general human nature, we're never going to get something perfect. But it's better than nothing, which I know is not the best sales message in the world.
No, but I think it's more about looking at the big picture here, because if with the example you were talking about earlier on, if you know that you are earning $7, $8, $9 for those people from one person starting the beginning of the series, and when you take into account all the drop off and whatnot, you know that a reader is worth $7, $8, $9. It's not about the 7 or the 8 or the 9th. It's more about understanding the range of, so it's around this level that I'm gonna earn. Let's say my reader is worth around this level of money. I mean, if it's 7.5 or 8.5, that's not going to rock the boat. No. But at least it gives you indication on, how much can I approximately bid and still end up profitable in the end? Maybe a couple of years later, as you say. But I think that's the takeaway, right? That you need to think it long term and as an indicator rather than like an exact number.
Exactly. Yeah, it's going to be closer than you have beforehand. That's for sure. It's it's not going to be exact. It's not going to be foolproof. But yeah, you will be closer than you were otherwise. So it's definitely worth doing. It can really give you some excellent insight into what a reader might be worth, which otherwise we're just guessing. And as you say, the only number we've really got is the royalty that you get from that specific upfront sale, rather than from looking at the whole bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, Adam, is there any things we missed out or I forgot to ask you about when it comes to read through that is important to cover?
I don't think so. The only thing I was going to mention is that, as I say, it's difficult to get this through in audio format. But if it's something that listeners or to the podcast are interested in, I do have a short course on calculating read through, which I'm very happy to give your listeners half price access to as an exclusive deal for them.
That's great. Yeah, and I will put a link to that discount code, or link rather, in the show notes below. So for you, dear listener, if you're interested in checking out Adam's course on this, you can get that very special I Am Writing Fantasy Podcast discount by going from that link below. And I think, Adam, you said that it's not going to expire, that link. Is that right? So people can just use it?
Yep, that'll be there forever. I think it's courses.indieauthormindset.com. I think you get 50% off of all of the courses. But if you go for the read through one, I think the code is AmWritingFantasy, and that'll mean that the course actually costs less than $25. So makes it a great deal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I would say go and check that out. And I know we just passed Christmas now, but maybe a late Christmas gift for yourself. Maybe that's an idea.
maybe. You can use your Christmas money on it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So I would say thanks a lot, Adam, for coming on to the AmWriting Fantasy Podcast and share your views and thoughts and knowledge about read through to help our listeners to make their own series more profitable long term.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you for listening throughout 2019, and have a very good New Year's Eve tomorrow. And we will see you in 2020.
If you like what you just heard, there's a few things you can do to support the AmWriting Fantasy Podcast. Please tell a fellow author about the show and visit us at Apple Podcast and leave a rating and review. You can also join Autumn and Jesper on patreon.com/AmWritingFantasy. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get awesome rewards and keep the AmWriting Fantasy Podcast going. Stay safe out there and see you next Monday.